What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over crouching states, so crouching attacks, going from block to crouch block, and returning back, and things like that. So we're going to be able to do basically everything we need to do for crouching in today's episode. I figure we might as well knock it out, especially as we get closer to AI. We may want to do things that, we basically want to get rid of all the possibilities and at least incorporate a minor version of everything we want to do in the game. So that way we can start putting that into AI. Of course, we can always update it later, so it's not the end of the world. But I wanted to get it out of the way. I've also changed the mutant skin, not that that's important for the series, but just so you're aware, the reason it looks like that is just because I've changed it. And I've also made it that you can't change the character's color after you enter character select by just using our isStageSelect up boolean. Just like to keep you guys in the loop. I'm going to go on this level, Trail of the Wise.
Ready?
Okay, so here we are. We got our two mutants, and we can crouch. Now, we could crouch already, but we couldn't actually do anything here. You can see I can press left and right, and I can add down left and down right states, which is good. This can be used for commands and things like that. So that logic was there. But nothing else, we couldn't do anything else there. So now we're going to be able to crouch down and block, which will actually take damage. If I could remember what button it was to attack. We're going to be able to block to go to crouch block. So standing block to crouch block. And then crouch block back to standing block. So there you go. We will be able to do crouching attacks, and you can see I have my hitboxes in the right spot. My proximity box, I'm just using my regular proximity box that I always do. So just because I'm a little bit lazy and didn't want to change it yet, but it's still in pretty much the same spot. I think it still works, but the active hitbox is the one we're worried about. And then I also have another attack here I can use. And this is the new damage mutant skin, just because the other two looked very similar after the change that I did. So the skins for like the damage effect are changed by the skin you have on, just because that was throwing me off. So the skin where you just get lighter like this is still in effect, but if you're the second color, then you become like this mint green. And none of that's really important. I'm just kind of showing you why that's the case now. So if you see that, you're aware that it's just some changes I've made to make it a little bit easier for me when testing some things and to kind of expose the differences. We'll cover these a little bit more. I do plan on doing like a material video or a video kind of explaining some of the design choices I've made and how I think we could actually make them into legitimate choices that could be good for your game. So anyway, that's for another time, but we're going to do all the crouching stuff today. So as you can imagine, with the way our system is set up, our crouching stuff is actually pretty easy. We basically need to add the states in the state machine, set up our attacks in the animation blueprint, and then we need to make sure we can do all those actions from the correct states in the code. Now there is one thing I want to mention before we get started on this, and that's the fact of we are not going to be changing the size of the hurt box during this tutorial. I initially intended for that to be the case. However, there are some complications with changing the hurt box size, and I did not feel like we should. I feel like it has to be its own episode. There's a lot going on, and while it would be great in crouching, we have to do it for more than just crouching. We need to be able to change the hurt box size when we are knocked down, when we jump, anything that changes our character size. We want it to resize to be the size of our character. We also want to be able to add multiple hurt boxes as well. So there's some things that I want to change, and I think it deserves its own episode. Even though we are crouching, you will be able to hit the player at any point, even if your hitbox is over it, just for the record. And now let's get started. So first of all, I believe this is episode 56. So if you have not watched this series, or any of the episodes in this series, or if you're not caught up, I'll leave a link to the very first episode of this series in the icon in the top right corner right now. It's not required that you watch it for this episode. You can do crouching without it. But to be completely honest, a lot of things like the state machine, of course, are already going to be a thing from other episodes. I'm not going to be covering all that. So I mentioned this in one of the prior episodes, but I've moved E crouched and made it a Boolean is crouched. If I could get down there, we got a lot of stuff. Or is crouching, excuse me. It's important that we make it is crouching because there is actually an Unreal character Boolean by default called is crouched, and we want to make sure we're not using that one. Or feel free to use that one, but then make sure you're setting that variable and not a custom one that you made. Basically, just make sure you're using the one that you're setting and you're getting the one that you're setting. You may also see some additional Booleans at this point, and that's because I'm trying to get ahead of some things that I have to work on. Don't worry, I've written everything down in a separate file, so I know exactly what I need to discuss with you. So if I don't mention it, for example, this Boolean is AI. I'm sure you can tell it's a little bit of foreshadowing for AI. The way I'm working on it, just kind of, I have to work on it a little bit before because I won't be able to show everything I want to in the time I normally work on these videos. So I have to work on it a bit before, so you may see some additional things, but I promise I won't add anything and not explain it down the line. So I'd say just don't add anything that I don't mention at the current time, and we will cover them in later episodes. Now, the only actual thing we have to do in code is we have to make sure that our states to start and stop crouching are accurate, and that, for me, to be able to start crouching, I have to be able to move, and my state cannot be stunned, jumping, launched, or recovery, because I don't want to be able to crouch in any of those states. You could also not crouch while you're in attacks and stuff. However, if you're in the animation for an attack, you'll never be able to go to crouch unless you give the crouch state a transition, the attack to crouch state. So the only issue will be if we do other logic in here, such as resizing the hitbox, or the hurtbox, I mean, then, of course, you'll want to make sure that you're not doing any attacks. But I've got a plan for that, so I would just set up your states for now. What states you don't want them to go to. And you've probably already done that, but I'm just doing an additional check. The important part was stop crouching. So stop crouching needs to have one or two things done to it. Remember, we're calling it stop crouching, but nothing is actually requiring us to be crouching prior to calling the stop crouching function. So what I mean by that is stop crouching is called on a release event. It's called when we release the down arrow, essentially, for player 2, and the S arrow for player 1. So, say on release, stop crouching. So whenever we release that key, stop crouching will be pressed. Well, if this if statement evaluates to false, we don't do this stuff inside. And if we don't do this stuff inside, we can still release it, and then this can evaluate to true. And then we'll set is crouching to false. Well, that's good. I've gone ahead and removed the can move boolean from the if statement, because can move determines if the player can move, literally. I mean, we have can attack, which is separate. It means they can move, they can walk around, jump, anything that's movement related, but they can't throw attacks. However, if we can't move, you could still press the button and still release the button, and it would go through this logic. So, again, say we're in the middle of an attack, and I release the crouch button. Well, I'm not going to stand back up if can move has to be true, because can move is false when I'm in the middle of an attack. So is crouching has to be able to be set false even if I can't move at the time. Now, our state machine will determine what states can transition to that. So if I'm in the attack, I'm not just going to stand up right away if I release it, but I do have to be able to set the boolean so that the character knows to go from the crouching state back to idle once they're in a state that can do that. Okay? So, long story short, remove can move from the stop crouching function. It still needs to be in start crouching, otherwise you can crouch at times you're not supposed to be able to. And then also take away where I was setting my character state if you're still doing that. That way you don't return to default every time you stop crouching, because if you stop crouching you may be in block or something like that, and you don't want to return from, like, if I'm crouch blocking and I release my crouch, I want to go to idle blocking because I'm still pressing the block button. So I don't want to return to default and then go to blocking. It looks a little weird and it can cause some bugs. So remove those two things from stop crouching and you should be good to go. The only other thing that I've done, and it's not required, but it just makes the game a little bit cleaner, is in all my start attack functions, I make sure the character is not blocking. So we already made sure they weren't stunned, but the way the system works is once you press a button, it's essentially there until we tell it that it's not there. And so if you've ever noticed, if you've not had a transition in your state machine, so for example, say like jump and heavy attack, you don't have an animation for that. You'll jump, press the button, nothing will happen. When you hit the ground, you go into your heavy attack. That's actually intended. It's not really a bug, because the intention is that you'll have an animation for every move, and if you don't, then you'll limit what the character can do. Like, you just don't let them use the heavy attack if they're in the air. Something like that. The reason for that is like this. So if I'm blocking, I can't go to any of my attacks. Or at least I don't want to be. The way it would work before we added these, to make sure the character state was not equal to e-character state blocking, is that if I was blocking and I press my light attack, then when I'm finished blocking, then I use my light attack. We don't want that. So, just a nice little thing to clean up some of that. And you can use this wherever you need to. Jump attacks, crouch attacks, exceptional attacks. I'm using them here. Supers, anything like that. Okay? And at that point, that's all the code changes we're going to be making. They're all pretty simple, but they are important. Little changes can make a huge difference in something like that. Now let's go into the animation blueprint, and we're not going to be doing much today. This is actually the extent of the logic, and honestly, all of this is copied over from the regular attacks we have. So don't be fooled. I didn't make them into a function as not to confuse anybody, because it has been a good 30 episodes probably since we've covered these. So I have these started, ended, and active anim notifies on each attack. Started spawns a proximity box, which can be used to check for collision, check if the character should auto block, and different things like that. So I spawn a proximity box, okay? And then I set the player that's using an attack to not be able to move at this point. We don't want them to be able to move. At this point, they should be still. Then, ended is when the animation is complete. So we reset some of our variables, like can combo and has landed hit. We clear our hitboxes, and then make sure the character can be able to move as long as they're intended to be able to do so. Okay? And lastly, I have my actives, which are where we create our active hitbox, which is what does the damage. We need to do all that for crouching as well. But I've gone ahead and moved it over here. And instead of making a function, I literally just copied the functionality. This is started. This is ended. And this is active. Now you saw me just go over it over here. So just literally copy. This is started up here. This is ended down here. So you can copy all that and paste it. And then during your actives, you can copy one of these and paste it. Again, also feel free to go make a function. I just didn't want to make a bunch of functions and confuse everybody, because it's been a long, long time since we messed with the started and ended logic. But I did want to mess with them because I did want to show you, crouching. I've separated potential X attacks from crouching attacks, and I just felt that it was right to do it this way. This is pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory, but let's go into our crouch attacks. I called them pretty basic names. So crouch L is just crouch left, crouch light, whatever you want it to be, really. And then CR is crouch right, crouch medium. And you see I've started, active, and ended. Now, if you're just looking at crouch attacks and have not been following the series, all I do is right-click and add notify, new notify, and then I add my 3 here. Okay? And then the way you get these in the graph is you literally just search for the name. You can see I've done it here, but you can type anim notify. You don't have to. You can just type the name of the notify. And then you type what it is. So like mutant, crouch light, and then started, active, ended. They're all here. So we did go over hitbox sizing and even location changing, but we didn't go over like height changing in the last episode. We're not going over depth changing, and we probably never will for this tutorial series just because we won't really need it. But if you're doing a 3D fighter, you can use it. So if you want to do height changing, like since it's a crouch attack, I was putting -20 on the Z. That way it would be lower to my character when I do an attack. So it makes sense for them to be doing a crouch attack. All we need to do is do the same logic that we do for the Y, but on the Z. So we have all this logic in here to kind of determine what location the hitbox should spawn at. And before, we were just passing along the X and Z, but we were adding the Y offset, the transform location Y, this is the line here, to the Y break vector from each of these transforms. That's what we were doing in the past. Now what we're going to do is the exact same thing, just with the Z. So here's the Z line. Okay, you can see it goes into these two nodes, and then gets put into the Z. So if you notice what's actually going on here, we have that this one and this one are for Y. This plus and this plus are for Z. And it's pretty simple. What we do is we take the Z value from our break vector here, and we add it to this value, this line, which is our Z, our transform location Z, right here, our input parameter, which is essentially our Z offset. And then we do the same thing for this bottom plus. I take the Z from the break vector, and then I use the Z offset as the other thing. In the make vector, we drag the Z's in from the plus, not from the break vector now. And then, now the Y and the Z data has been successfully stored in this make vector, so you don't have to change anything here. It's already going into the hitbox location. And if that was confusing the way I explained it, but you have the Y offset working, literally just copy this logic. You don't have to separate it because you're already doing all of these things that you'll need to do anyway. Just copy the pluses and remove where the Y's are plugged into it. Plug in Z's, and then where the Y offset was plugged into it, plug in the Z offset. And then you'll be good to go. It's as simple as that. I mean, if you want to do depth for any reason, or if you're doing a 3D fighter, you do the same thing. Give it an X offset and pass it in. And now that we've done that, we can successfully give it any location we want on the height. I'm putting -20 for mine. I've also changed the scaling a bit. And now when we play, we should be good to go. And once we do this, I'll go over the state machine. But I just want to show you that it is lower than the other attacks.
Ready?
So if I were to walk over to this guy, do an attack, it's pretty high up. It's about up to his forehead almost. Like right around his forehead area. But if I attack using this, you can see it's down by like his abs. So the hitbox height was actually changed. Okay. Now let's find out what we're doing in the state machine to get everything to work. So we already had idle to crouch, but essentially we just check our is crouching boolean. Pretty simple. I don't have any transition events or anything. And then crouch to idle is the same. We just check that not is crouching. Pretty simple stuff. But this is all the new stuff we've added. So we can now go to crouch light, crouch medium, crouch hit reaction, crouch block, and crouch block can go to manual block, and manual block can go to crouch block. I don't have automatic block going to crouch block because I think if you're blocking normally, or sorry, if you're blocking automatically, you'll probably not be able to crouch. So crouch light is what you'd expect probably. Crouch to crouch light is we just check if it was light attack used. Remember, this is not meant to be confusing. We don't need specific variables for if, you know, the light attack was used or if crouch light attack was used. We just need light attack used. Has the player pressed that specific button and can they go into that attack? It's pretty much that simple. And then the state will determine what attack to do from there. If they're jumping, crouching, maybe blocking like a reversal or something, and there you go. So there's no reason to have anything more than just check for was light attack used. If you're in crouch, you can go to crouch light just like that. And then you can imagine crouch to medium is the same thing. It's except was medium attack used. And then if you have heavy or super from here, feel free to do those. Now remember, these are attacks, and the way we do our logic, we still have to do start attack transition and end attack transition. So for crouch to crouch medium and crouch to crouch light, have start attack transition. This just kind of sets some of our stuff up, like it creates some hitboxes, cleans up some hitboxes, things like that. Allows us to be able to move and things like that. Then from crouch light to crouch and crouch medium to crouch, we have end attack transition. We've covered this plenty of times in the series, so I'm not going to go over it again, but just remember to do it. I know it can be easy to forget, especially when you go quite a bit without adding new attacks, or you have to do that. Okay, now we go from crouch to crouch hit reaction, which I actually don't think I showed, but it's the same as like a regular hit reaction. When we take damage, we want to display that we've been hit. So crouch to crouch hit reaction. The logic for this is just basically is the character state stunned. Now that our crouching is a boolean, we can be both stunned and crouching at the same time. So if we take a hit, we'll automatically go to stunned. That's the logic we have set up. And thus, if we take a hit, we'll go to crouch hit reaction. Then I do the same thing that I do with our regular hit reaction. I grab our character reference, grab the stun time, and set that as the play rate basis to expose this for you to be able to do that. Click on your animation, and then click the little tab here for play rate basis. It'll say expose. And then this will play at the designated speed. This is what the hit reaction looks like. Okay. No transition events there or back. They're just not necessary in this case. Not for me. And then, lastly, we want to be able to go from crouch to crouch block and crouch block back to crouch. So this is also pretty simple. No states. And if you want to go from crouching to crouch block, all you have to do is add the blocking in, right? So we make sure our character state is blocking. Vice versa, if you want to go to crouch block to crouch, we want to remove the blocking state. So if character state is not equal to blocking, then we can go to crouch. Very simple. The opposite of that is if we don't want to get rid of the crouch, but we want to get rid of whether we're crouching or not, we can go from crouch block to manual block, or manual block back to crouch block. So crouch block to manual block is this. The way I've set it up is I make sure that the character is no longer crouching, but the character state is still blocking. And the reason I check for that, if we had crouch block to manual block, and the condition was just that the character is no longer crouching, then the problem is you don't have to check if it's blocking. So if you essentially did both of these in the same frame, you would go to the blocking even if you stopped pressing the blocking, and then you would get stuck blocking and you'd have to press block and unblock again. Again, trying to avoid anything like that that just makes the game less enjoyable, that makes the mechanics a little funky. So I'm being explicit and specific here to say that we're not crouching and the state is still blocking. Vice versa, if you want to do manual block to crouch block, then all we need to do is check if we're crouching. This is because, quite simply, if you change states and you're not in the blocking state anymore, we already have a transition set up to go from manual block to crouch block, and then crouch block to crouch if we're not blocking. So if you were to stop blocking on the same frame as you stop crouching, you may go here for a second, and then you would automatically transition to crouch. However, this wouldn't look bad since you're already in the blocking state. It would just do the regular block transition and then automatically cancel out. So either way, it's not like it puts you in some state you can't get out of or makes it look like the animations are changing frequently. You're literally just going from manual block to crouch block to crouch. If you don't like that, you could always do an additional check. That's perfectly fine. I didn't feel it was necessary. Or better yet, instead of doing that additional check, just add an option to go from manual block to crouch. And do that. if you're now crouching and not blocking. Then you'll have all bases covered. So there you go. That's everything for crouching, really. I mean, crouching is not too complicated of a mechanic is once you have all the other stuff in. Like, I know not everything is that easy right off the bat, but since we already have our attack system in and we had the ability to crouch, doing everything else that we can do with crouching is not too bad. Again, we do have to do the hitbox changes because you can see that so I've intentionally made the one hitbox a little bit above where the guy's hitbox should be while he's crouching. Excuse me, his hurtbox should be while he's crouching. And we shouldn't be able to do damage to him because at this point the hitbox is clearly over his head. So that's because our hurtbox is not changing size. Again, we'll need a whole episode on that, and I'll throw in multiple hurtboxes as well in that episode just so we can cover everything with hurtboxes in one go. But now we have everything with crouching. We just have to change the size and set up additional logic that we may want with our hurtboxes, and we'll be good to go.
Ready, fight.
So guys, if this video helped you, please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do. It's free and I just really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the support, and I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon and YouTube membership supporters. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the support you've given this channel, all the love you've given this series, and all the series that I do, so thank you very, very much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord. There's a link in the description. You can click it, and we'll be happy to help you out and sort out any issues you ran into while doing this series. Lastly, guys, if you want to come check us out on Twitch, twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. Now, we've been doing Dark Souls. We've been doing Souls Wednesday, every Wednesday since we started pretty much, and Resident Evil Friday. However, we finished all the Resident Evil games that I had planned on playing on the stream, and the ones that I hadn't played before. So, at this point, I'm going to be switching over Resident Evil Friday to Programming Friday, and we're going to be programming every day on that stream. Now, I may do live streams on YouTube, so you can check me out there, right here on this channel. I'll just do live streams on Friday around 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you might have to check that out and see if you prefer that over Twitch. But either way, we'll be doing some programming streams soon, so just be on the lookout for that. Anyway, thanks again, guys, for everything. I really appreciate it. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.